but Judah, you said, I mean, you talked a lot about that there was a real opportunity for the U.S. to engage in the world um, last at the beginning of last year. Um, do you think that promise has been fulfilled? And I asked this specifically because the World Politics Review today had this question: how do we preserve Washington's global leadership role at a time when its model of governance is increasingly called into question?
So I guess the easy answer is that engaged in the world is sort of value neutral, right? So clearly, I think that the Biden team has very much engaged in the world. That seems to me, they've had I'd say, a much more proactive and active first year in office than I anticipated. And I think they did do well to take some months in the beginning to sort of re-engage, reopen channels of communication and things like that with partners, to take the measure of adversaries and rivals. So I think there was a sort of a moment of, if not hesitation, then reflection, which I think some people were impatient with, because after the 4 years of Trump, there was this sense of we have to get going right away. I felt like that was relatively prudent. And then I feel like there was an initial round of diplomacy with allies that was pretty productive in terms of smoothing over some of the rough edges that had been left by the Trump administration. The initial diplomacy with Russia as well, I felt was again prudent, trying to essentially establish the frameworks of what the Biden team was hoping for and expecting, but also where its red lines might be. So I thought that was effective. I was a little surprised, I'd say, by the time it took to engage with China. In terms of the leadership level, there was that first very rocky and volatile meeting in Alaska, which I think sort of caused some sparks and had a lot of people, I guess, expecting the worst. I don't think we quite had the worst. I don't think, I feel like the Biden team, perhaps they didn't have the choice, but took longer than I expected to get to the leader level summit, which we saw more recently. And I guess also some of those Trump era sanctions and or rather trade tariffs and things like that really haven't even been begun to be addressed. So I think that was the big the surprise for me. I think something that a lot of people were surprised by, but myself less so, because of the time I've spent in Europe and keeping a close eye on transatlantic relations, was some of the bumps in the road in terms of transatlantic relations. I think there was an expectation, definitely in Europe, and I think in the sort of Atlanticist community on both sides of the pond, that there would just be not just a honeymoon, but an extended period of cooperation and smooth communication and a real reparation of the damage that Trump did. My feeling is that that was always a little unrealistic because of the depth and the breadth of some of the differences in transatlantic policymaking. And that there's always this sense of, especially with Democratic presidents, finally someone who likes us, finally someone who appreciates us, who appreciates our way of doing things, multilateralism, diplomacy, et cetera. And then there's always this big surprise when they realize that the president of the United States is actually the president of the United States. And when US interests take priority, the president will always go after those first. So I think we saw that with AUKUS, for instance, the Afghanistan withdrawal, which I think was a pretty courageous move. And I think the long-term wise one, even though there have been some awful humanitarian consequences from it. I guess to wrap up, it's sort of a wide range. I think the gaps, I'd say, so far would be, and I think they're trying to address that, would be Southeast Asia would be a prominent gap in terms of, there have been actually some diplomatic movement there and engagement there, so that might be a little unfair, but maybe with less results than maybe one would have expected. The Quad in South Asia and Asia Pacific seems like there's more momentum there. I'd say Latin America and South America in particular, there's been a real absence of urgency. And I think that there are quite a few urgent matters on the table there. And then I think that sadly, as always, Africa takes a back seat, and I think wrongly so, because of how much exciting opportunities there are there, how much upside potential there is, and how critical it's becoming in terms of the global economy, in terms of the future demographically, in terms of demographic dynamics and things like that. So I think that's a real missed opportunity, but it's a historic one for the US. So I guess that would be my sort of round the globe summing up. But I do think it was a very active year. And I think, especially given the institutional damage done by the Trump administration to the State Department in particular, and a lot of the blockages on nominations for ambassadors and high-level positions, I think they've done a pretty good job. There's never going to be 100% error-free US foreign policy, but I think they've done a pretty good job, and where they might have stepped on some toes or ruffled some feathers, they did a good job to try to step back in real quick and try to address it. I'm thinking in particular with France.